Today we're going to dive into the creation, implementation, and downfall of Riot's newest champion, Aurora. After a few months in the Rift, is she everything Freak wanted her to be, or is she one of League's biggest flops? Let's start with where Aurora stands now before digging into her past. Is she doing fine and it just feels like we're forgetting about her, or is she in really as rough a spot as it seems? Currently, she's barely holding on to mid lane viability with a 47 to 48% win rate, which isn't catastrophic, but it's not great either. Here's where things get shaky though. Her pick rate is at a low 2.1%, and her ban rate has dropped to just 7%. It means she's already fading from the public eye. Now, some of you might say it's unfair to compare her current stats to her launch numbers, and you'd be right if I were doing that. But what I'm pointing out here is the unusually fast decline in her popularity. This suggests that her downfall isn't just due to balance patches or nerfs, but stems from deeper issues in her design and development. Before we judge Aurora too harshly though, let's break down her playstyle and lore to understand why she's in this spot. She's a special girl born in the icy tundra of the Freljord. She goes her whole life ostracized from her tribe because her eyes can perceive the spirit realm and the material world at the same time, making her see the world differently, and no one truly believes her. Having only one true confidant in her life, her aunt, she uses her encouragement to go out and seek understanding of what she can see, and she becomes a scientist studying the spirit world. Now she's a wanderer and pursuing anything that can lead her to the truth, and finds herself given a quest by the god of the Forge to seek out his siblings for answers. Honestly, not a bad narrative. It fits with the Spirit Walker characters of the Freljord, but here's the disconnect. Her design doesn't exactly scream loner scientist. The bunny tail and the exaggerated features give her more of a cute mascot vibe than a haunted, spirit-seeing outcast. Now let's look at her kit. After all, even if the lore is off, good mechanics can make up for a lot, right? Let's start off with her passive, Spirit Abjuration. Aurora's spells and attacks exorcise spirits from enemies, healing her and granting movement speed. To be honest, it's not a bad passive. It rewards poke-heavy play and ties into her spirit world lore. And apparently everyone in the Rift has a few ghosts rattling around inside them, which is pretty interesting. Now her Q, Twofold Hex. Fires a missile that curses enemies and on recast pulls the curse back, damaging enemies along the way. Now this is a pretty standard skill shot with a recall mechanic. It adds some dynamic play potential, but it's nothing groundbreaking. Her W, Across the Veil. Aurora leaps and becomes invisible for a short time after landing. It's a solid escape tool. The spirit realm connection is clear here, and it reinforces her lore some more. E, the Weirding. Opens a window to the spirit realm, firing a blast of spirit magic that damages and slows enemies, then hops backward. Honestly, I actually really enjoy this one. It plays into her mobility and poke identity, keeping her elusive while chipping away at enemies. Now lastly, her R, Between Worlds. Aurora leaps, releasing a shockwave that damages and slows enemies. She then creates an area that traps them and lets her teleport across the zone. I really enjoy this ability. It's a powerful CC tool that lets her control fights on her terms. Instead of being a frustrating death trap like some ults, it adds tension and makes both teams play smarter. None of her abilities are bad, but they're not exactly revolutionary either. Her kit is functional, but it doesn't achieve that perfect harmony between lore, visuals, and gameplay that makes a champion truly memorable. Now that we've read up on her lore and looked into her mechanics, let's check out what her track record is previously in the Rift to see how she's gotten here today. When Aurora launched, she was everywhere, dominating nearly every lane with win rates of over 50%. Well, except for jungle. Her entry shook the Rift, but after a few weeks in the spotlight, Riot had to pull back. And by pull back, I mean she got nerfed. Hard. Now you might think, so she got nerfed and people lost interest. And while that's partially true, I see nerfs like Aurora's as a test. Here's why. When a champion is overpowered, sure, they're fun to play because they're winning, but the real test of a champion's success is how they perform after the nerfs. Once the broken aspects were dialed back, Aurora had to stand on her own two bunny feet, relying on the core mechanics of her kit. The question is, did she pass that test, or are her current stats a sign that something more fundamental went wrong? Before I let you go, let's review where Aurora stands. Let's start with the pros. She expands on the Freljord's lore, particularly the spirit world and its demigods within. She introduces a fun take on an area control CC with her ult, which can create tense and decisive moments in teamfights. Her kit isn't problematic balance-wise, and she fits as a solid mid lane mage. And finally, Riot's art team nailed the technical aspects of her design, showing their high production quality. But as for her cons, her kit, while functional, is a bit dull to both play with and play against, aside from her ult in my opinion. Secondly, there's a clear disconnect between her lore, art design, and mechanics. They feel like separate pieces that don't fit into a cohesive whole. And finally, her explosive release and subsequent nerfing have left a sour taste in the community's mouth, which is common for champions that have problems like that in the early days, and it might take time for her to rebuild that reputation. So, what do you think about Aurora? Did Riot miss the mark, or is she just waiting for her moment to shine? Let me know in the comments, and if you're interested in more deep dives into League's ever-expanding roster of champions, make sure to subscribe for more.